I'm Rebecca Chapman, and I'm here with Bernhardt Abrahamson today in his home on June 8th, 2017. So you grew up in Sweden, I understand?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about growing up in Sweden.
Oh, what can I say? It was wartime. Well, actually, I was born in 1930, so the wartime came 9 years later, 1939. Well, it was Depression time. My father was a construction painter. When I say house painter, it sounds as if he painted houses. But that was not the case. It was construction, painting rough stuff. But he was a good painter. He really was a skilled one. My mother stayed at home and did all kinds of things, whatever, to earn a little bit extra money. I was the youngest of a family with 6 children. I had 2 brothers, the one being 2.5 years older, the other one being 10 years older, 3 sisters, one being 6 years older, the other one being 12 years older, and the oldest one 14 years older than I was. So in one sense I had a pampered life, being the last one. But anyway, didn't feel that we were poor, although we were. But everyone was poor at the time. There were no jobs. Things were tough. And so you had what I think a rather nice childhood. I couldn't complain. But of course there was also the Jewish Welfare Board that helped out. And things that people don't even think of. But when you had a bar mitzvah, you got a suit. On Hanukkah, they had what they call blå-weiß, which means blue and white party, where kids would get some toys. And most of the time, I think I just got books from them. Then once a year, I think, when I started school, we got, no, not once a year, we got a pair of shoes. And then we got 1 or 2 repairs, resoling if you wanted to. When you had, if your feet grew too big, too fast, bad luck, But I was lucky because my brother, who was 2.5 years older, was tall. He was 6 foot something. But the main thing was that he had big feet. And I got his shoes. And usually I had to take 2 steps for the shoes to move. But anyway, the good part about that was that I grew up as if I had lived going barefoot all my life. And I remember later on when they had a health inspection in the Navy, I was to stand on a table. And everyone came in to see what perfect feet looked like. That's gone, of course, by now. But that was one thing. And then, what can I say? School started at the age of 7. And I went to school at the time, and I facetiously used to say it was uphill walking from my house to the school. And unfortunately, it was same uphill going back, which is not true, of course. But these were old buildings, really old buildings. And at the end of this so-called playground was the physical education and the band in the basement and industrial arts. Because at that time, boys and girls took 2 things, industrial arts, woodworking, and home economics. And that was for both. And because of the wartime, we had to learn a lot of things. I learned how to crochet. I learned how to, we had to do it. I made all kinds of pot holders and so on. I don't know how to do it now. But the other thing, which was terribly important, was to learn how to darn socks. You had big holes in them. You didn't throw away, you couldn't do that. So you had to learn how to darn it, that is, repair the stuff. And that we all did, and I remember that very vividly. Then, that was, I liked that building because of the carpenter teacher. He was a very nice chap. Because you have to remember also that at that time, anti-Semitism was growing very, very strongly. And to find somebody like this teacher who basically couldn't give a damn, who just went out of his way to treat me good.
Sure. So what was it like being in Sweden right before World War II? As a Jew?
No, it was, again, you grow up as a child and you become used to the, should I say, discrimination, hateful comments and so on. It just becomes part of your life. And so, again, as I said, this teacher was wonderful and I adored him. There were others that were not so nice. For instance, in my second grade, they had another fellow, a Jewish fellow, who they put back a year. He was 1 year older, that was Sigurd. 1 year older, but they put him back 1 year so that neither of us should be alone in the school.
Wow.
And inevitably you would always find when there was a new kid coming in, they had to prove themselves by beating up the Jew boys. And so we didn't want to go out on intercession.
Yeah.
And some teachers would say, okay, stay inside, it's safer. Others would say, no, out you go, and that's it.
Really?
And so you had to do these things.
So you saw anti-Semitism like in school and outside of school?
What was that?
There was a lot of anti-Semitism in school and as well as outside.
That was everywhere. At the time, and this is hard to understand, there were two major ideologies, communism and Nazism.
Yeah.
And they had enough of communists in the country for having people that actually supported you, saying that Jews were okay, and the Nazis who said, why don't you go back to Jerusalem, or something like that. And you had that all the time. But again, I'm sort of skipping now, but we lived on a place that was a square that had only two entrances, and a lot of Jews lived there, but only two entrances through the houses. I am not sure about this, but I believe that a lot of the Jews felt, given the circumstances, that this was a trap. You couldn't get out, easy to close it in there. So it began already, they tried to move out. And when I was 6, I think it was, we moved out of that one and moved into another place. And again, there were a lot of Jews living in that square, but where we moved, there was only one family, and that was that boy that we ultimately had to go. When I say a lot of Jews, you have to realize one thing. At that time, Sweden had a population perhaps of 7 million. Stockholm, where I was born, was perhaps 500,000 people. The total number of Jews in the whole of Sweden was no more than maybe 11 or 12,000.
Really? Wow.
And in Stockholm, they said at the time we were 5,000 to 6,000. So again, it's hard to understand that such a small group could be so hated.
Yeah.
So this is just one incident. A new fellow came to the school, big, hefty fellow.
Yeah.
And Sigvard, that was my friend, and I, we looked very, oh my God, we're going to get the thrashing. And the time came and we asked, can we stay in? And the teacher said, out. And we went out, and there we were, and immediately surrounded by a couple of people, kids, teasing us and expecting this new fellow to come in and give us a beating. And they started to hit us, and we started to fight and trying to avoid all things that happened. And suddenly we realized we were not alone.
He was also Jewish?
There was somebody else helping our side, us, and that was the new fellow.
Oh no.
Yeah, turned out, of course, that he came from a communist family, but that has nothing to do with it. He was fantastic. He was also an artist. He carved wooden figures, which I had several of, which I lost over the years. I still have one little piece that he made because he was a contemporary artist, ultimately became very famous, had a lot of pieces exhibited in the Stockholm Museum of Modern Art. And anyway, we became fast friends, a friendship that lasted through life until
so what extent of an education did you and your siblings have?
Nothing. I got 7th grade grades in Sweden. The system was such that you had to have 8 years of compulsory, mandatory education. You could move, in your 4th grade, you could move to what was known in Swedish realskola, in German Realschule. It is like middle school. But it was high at the time. At the time it was considered to be quite an achievement. You could move there, on the 4th grade you moved in to be bound for a gymnasium, that is for high school. 5th grade you could go in to this middle school. In 5th grade I did go to middle school. I passed tests and I went in there. However, the rules were that you didn't have to complete it. If your income, your work was needed in the family, you could end after 7 grades and do the 8th grade in the evening, or get dispensation to just saying, life experience or whatever it is. And after 7 years, I left 2 years after going into this school. So I got 7 years actually, and that was it. And then I started to work. I was an errand boy for a Swedish newspaper, which still exists, Expressen, the Express.
Yeah.
And then I did some errand jobs for
Baker.
Baker. No, that came much later. That Baker came much later. No, what would you call it? They delivered denim, dungarees to workers, all that time. And that store doesn't exist anymore, but it was there. And that's where I began to get a feel for there's some world outside, because very often these were seamen that you delivered to. And also in this middle school, I became good friends with a fellow who was very good also. He never really, he had some anti-Semitism, but he liked me, so I like you, but I don't like you, the kind of thing. But anyway, whose father was a sea captain. And he, during the Second World War, what happened to the Swedish fleet was that they were divided because there was a blockade of Europe by the British. And inside the blockade, the Germans ruled, and they took half of the Swedish Marine. The other half was sailing for the British or for the Allies and could not go in. Now this fellow, he was a sea captain, he sailed outside the blockade for the Allied, and then for some odd reason once managed to get home, and I met him and became my hero, And he had his ancestral home was out on a big island in the Stockholm archipelago. The archipelago outside Stockholm is thousands of islands, and very, very desirable place, good fishing and doing all kinds of things. And I was then invited by my friend to his ancestral home, to his grandmother out there. And that way I got to know the archipelago, otherwise I would never have known anything. There I got to know a fisherman, and I did some fishing, learned some fishing, which consisted at the time of rowing. I just rowed and so on. But anyway, that's how my first inclination towards sea became prominent. I wanted to go to sea. I wanted to see the world, and the war was on. How can you see the world? You can't anything. But anyway, that's what happened at that time. The Swedish school system also had you going to it was called Kristendomskunskap, knowledge of Christianity. And as long as they dealt with the Old Testament, we were supposed to participate in that. But once they moved into the New Testament, we were supposed to go to the Jewish school, religious school. And if you didn't want to, then you could stay, but then you had to take the Christianity, the New Testament. And so again, I think that must have been in 4th grade, I started then Jewish religious school, which did nothing for me. I didn't understand the words. They used nice words, such as emancipation. I had never, even today I remember what the heck was emancipation. Anyway, and that dealt with biblical stories and everything, and I just didn't get anything. My father considered himself to be religious because he kept kosher and kept everything that you should. And he forced me to go to synagogue. We had at least 2, maybe even more, in Stockholm. There was the big sanctuary, the temple, downtown, and there was a little place called the Polish synagogue, which was Orthodox. And so we went there, and my memories of it are not good at all. Ever asking my father anything, he says, "Don't ask, just do." Because he didn't know himself. And as a result, to me, Judaism was not really a living doctrine for me at the time. And here I jump. I never knew any happy Jewish holidays. I didn't know they existed.
Really? So what holidays did you celebrate? What holidays did you celebrate growing up?
The holidays we had, of course, every Shabbat. My mother would make, if we could find the chicken, then we had chicken soup, and she had her homemade noodles, So the whole house, over tables and so on, was a sheet of dough that was lying there to dry. I don't think you've ever seen that one, because later on she would take the dry sheet, roll it up, and then cut it in strips, and that became what in Yiddish is called lokshen, that is noodles. She would make that one. So every Shabbat we had something, and my mother lit candles, and my father did the brachot and so on. Yeah, that was part just of a routine. But then the holidays, Passover, was an interminably long process. But you didn't get anything to eat until you had finished every single word in the Haggadah in Hebrew, which neither of us understood, and so on. Yom Kippur, of course, was Yom Kippur, and to me, they all resembled Tisha B'Av. It's nothing at all. I had no idea that there was any joy in Jewish holidays until when I was at sea, if there was a Jewish holiday, I made absolutely certain I would not be at home. Absolutely certain. And this went on until I met Varda. That's the final. Then, finally, there was joy. I remember Simchat Torah. And we had that also in Sweden, and they would throw candy out and the kids would scrounge around to get candy. But it was no joy. No joy at all, And that, as I said, came only when I married, or before I married, actually.
So, we're to jump back a little bit. Let's talk about your time at sea a little bit. So, why did you decide to join the Navy?
Wait a second here now. There are 2 aspects, there is the Navy, which is military, and there is the Merchant Marine, which is commercial ships.
And you did both?
Yeah. As I started with the Merchant Marine, had no thought ever of going into the Navy. No, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to see the world, and so on. And that happened in 1944. I was 14 years old when I finally managed to, asking one of the schooners lying along the along the piers in Stockholm, if they might have any job for me. And they said yes. So I became a deckhand on one of those, on a ship that never left the pier. and my job was to serve the food, prepare the food to the extent I could, which meant that I went to my mother and asked what can I do. And since everything was rationed at the time because of the war, my mother always used potatoes for everything. So there was potato kugel, and she taught me how to do that, and so I did, you know. So it was kugel in the morning, kugel in the afternoon, kugel in the evening. And that is basically what I did. And serving tea and coffee. And coffee again was not the coffee that we are used to. At the time they had to have substitutes. And one of the substitutes was you took chicory, which the French do still today, adds a taste to it. You roasted it. And then you took sugar beets and cut it into like French fry, and then you roasted that in the oven, and it came out black and sweet. You ground this with the chicory, and if you were lucky and had some coffee, you put a little bit coffee to it, that's well, and that's what people drank. And when in 1947, when I first time came to the States and had real coffee, I thought it was the most awful thing I ever tasted. You get used to everything. But anyway, so that's what I did at the time. In due time, the war ended in 45, but this ship, or this brick schooner, carried bricks for construction.
This was the Merchant Marines? Was this the Merchant Marines? Or
Yes. So I started, once they took me up north. They actually left the pier, and and we went up north. And and the captain's wife would come aboard and give all the food, you know, because I couldn't cook anything. So my job now was to make coffee, the kind of coffee I knew. So I had to go and fill the pot with water and make coffee. And so I did. Certainly, a certain malady occurred among the crew. They had all kinds of stomach problems. And the captain accused his wife of, was the food really good? Was it fresh? Was it okay? And she changed little thing, but the stomach ailments continued and became even worse. Whereupon the captain thought, there's something else, so he started to follow me. And what I had discovered, that was instead of my going down and pump water, which was hard work, you know, there was a big barrel standing there with water. So why the heck don't I take that water? And I did that, just dipped a can in and I made coffee with it. Well, that water was, to say the least, contaminated. I don't want to get into the details of it because you wouldn't understand it anyhow. It was essentially what is known as bilge water. It comes from the bilges of the ship. Oh my God, God knows what was in it. And he got very angry, the captain. And I had a bike that I used all the time to go back. So when we came up north, he said, I don't want you on the ship to go back away, take your bike and bike back again. I got to see a lot of Sweden during that time. And that was the experience with that one. Well, then later on, the war ended, and and I got another ship. Because what had happened, again, this is hard to understand today, that the Swedish merchant marina was condensed, all of it. But the Allied said, look here, we need ships to repatriate troops and material and all that stuff. Became known as the shipping pool. And you participate in it, or you will be barred from trade when everything is done. So the Swedes, they needed all kinds of things, so they put in all kinds of old ships that the pool couldn't take because they were no good. So I got a ship called Verna, an old one, that went to Poland. This was 45. War had just ended. And to pick up coal, because Sweden had lived on wood all the time during the wartime. And that's how that started. And that was really traumatic, I must say, because you saw things. This was just maybe a month or two after the war had ended. And it's hard to believe what actually went on at that time. And I can leave that alone. But anyway, from there on, it was a progression from one ship to the next ship to the next ship and next ship, got into the increasingly wider trade, as they call it. Instead of just being in the Baltic Sea, it became now the North Sea, it became the Mediterranean, it became the States, and so on. So things changed. In due time, I had no thought of going to school or anything like that. I liked my life very much until something happened. I had a very good friend, and we sailed together a long time. We met on the ships, and we did all kinds of things, a little bit drinking and things that you shouldn't do perhaps. But one ship we were on, this was already 10 years later, 54 perhaps. Yeah, there was one old man who drank himself. He suffered from delirium tremens, hallucinations and God knows what. And when he had a little bit of drink, he thought of himself as being a snake. So he would go around, sort of slinking around corners and go psh, psh, and so on and so on. And my friend and I, we looked at him and we thought, oh my God, is that our future? And we decided, no, this is not good at all. So we left the ship. I decided to try to go for ship's officer school. My friend, who had, he had a little company that made stamps, for, I don't know what it's called in English, but if you want to have a box like that, you have it flat. And then you stamp it out so you can fold it. And he opened up that kind of company and did very well. He and I stayed in touch until he died. And that was it. I then went into the ship's officer school and asked, what are the conditions? It turned out you would need, number one, 4 years of sailing, actually being on ships, not just, so every day it was counted. I counted up and found I had 5 years of that, so I met that requirement. However, you couldn't go in there unless you had a Swedish high school diploma, which was yes, thank you, thank you very much, which I of course didn't have. Instead of then having the diploma, you could take a preliminary schooling, a 4-month course, where they were supposed to bring you up, and now I've forgotten how, bring you up to high school competence in math, physics, chemistry, English and Swedish. I think that was it. And that's what I did. That course started at 8 o'clock in the morning and went to 4 o'clock in the evening, six days a week through Saturday, and lasted for 4 months. And then we had exams to sit down. And I still remember the main teacher, a very distinguished gentleman, standing in front of us and saying, well, he said, I have done mine, and slicked down his hair. Now, gentlemen, God and you will have to do yours. I never forget it. Anyway, so I was admitted into it.
And that was to the Navy?
No, this was ship's officer school.
Oh.
Now, the Navy comes because of that.
Okay.
You know, because at the time, it was compulsory military service in Sweden. You had to do national service, come hell or high water. And when I was registered, of course, in their wisdom, they assigned me to the infantry. You know, and I had a heck of a job trying to persuade them that I'm not an infantryman. I have been 5 years at sea, and I don't want to go to the infantry. So finally they said, okay, designated for naval service. Okay, so then, but that was postponed as long as I went to school. So I did this, and the schooling consisted of, first you got a mate's, that is, mate's testimonial, and then later on a certificate. With the certificate you could now sail as any kind of mate, third, second or first mate. You could even sail as a captain on a very small ship. But that wasn't my ambition. I wanted to be a sea captain. So then, with this behind me, I could now take my sea captain's course, which I did. It was another 12 months. And once that was done, however, I would not get my license unless I fulfilled certain conditions. You had to sail in a certain capacity, in a certain trade, in a certain size ship for so long, and do this and do that and all that thing, which of course would take a long time. But the Navy said, okay, it's time now to do your service. And there I had now two choices. Because I had navigation and all that, they said the minimum service you can do is 15 months. That's foregone conclusion. However, if you go to take a reserve officer's exam school, and then you have to serve an extra 12 months, that is altogether 27 months, then you have certain benefits. You become an officer in the Navy. And I thought it over and I said, gee, of course, that's good. And not only that, I wanted to stay in Stockholm because now I had gotten used to be at home. So I wanted to do that. And so I went into the Navy, first to the Naval War College, which is where the balls take place and all that. Barbara has pictures of it. And then, once I had graduated from the War College, now I had to do my duty, my active duty. And that active duty consisted of training in mines and torpedoes. So I became a mine and torpedo officer.
Wow.
And I served on a destroyer, and Varda has pictures of it there as well. So that's what happened. And then when I finished my active duty, then I started to sail again. And now, of course, I had all kinds of credentials, so I sailed in big ships and did all kinds of things. Meanwhile, one of the requirements to get a captain's, a master's license for unlimited, what was known as an unlimited captain's license. That meant you could serve as captain on a ship of any size, in any trade, and of any propulsion. And at that time they still had sailing ships. So I had to register with a company between Finland and Sweden. There's a group of islands called Åland, and they had 5 ships of sailing ships. Now, everyone in Europe who wanted to have a captain's license had to serve 18 months on such a ship. So of course, those companies, or the owner, he got free cruise. As a matter of fact, you had to pay to go on it. And it was extremely difficult to get it, because when it would mean 2 trips. You would take a ship from Europe down to Australia or to Peru, actually, where you would load guano. Do you know what guano is? It's a fertilizer deposited by seabirds. Okay. And from Australia it would be grain.
Yeah.
And it would take maybe half a year to go down and half a year up and so on. And you had to do that for 18 months. And so, but when a place became open, they would call you because you were on a waiting list. You would get the letter saying be here in that time. But at that time, you couldn't just, if I was at sea somewhere, how would I get to that ship? You didn't have just get on an airplane and fly. That was not the way it was done. So I missed out on that constantly. And then in 1958, after we had just gotten married, the laws changed. They realized that if they have that requirement, pretty soon they will have no captains whatsoever. And besides that, the ships had been lost. There was one that happened in, I think, 54 or 55, got lost with all hands and so on. And today, one of those ships, by the way, is in the South Port in New York.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't remember now which one it is. They used to be called P ships. Preußen, Pommern. They had names that started with P. And I don't know which one is now at the South Seaport, lying there as a museum ship. But anyway, the laws changed. So in 1958, I finally got my license. Unlimited. I'm very proud of it. I have it, and so on. But by that time, also, I didn't know what to do. Should I go back sailing? But we were just married, and so on. And also, intervening with this had been that the Suez Crisis, 56. As I mentioned, I was on the last ship to go through. I applied from the Philippines for a position with Zimlines, which is the Israeli merchant marine. And I got the job there on, it doesn't matter at this point, but it ended up after a couple of times on one of their passenger ships. And that passenger ship, it was Zion, right? Yeah, it was called Zion. And what it was doing, they carried captured war material from the Egyptians to the United States. Because what had happened was that the war material that the Egyptians had was from Russia. And so captured this with tanks, airplanes, and weapons and all that, and being analyzed by the US Army or Navy or whatever it was. And that's what we carried back there. And then on the way back, Varda was on the ship as a passenger.
As a passenger, yeah.
And that's where we met. And the story there with Varda is, of course, that she was born in Israel and had come back just before the Suez War, 55, right?
Well, my parents went back to Israel in 51 after I graduated high school. And they couldn't make it there because my father was blind and the job was somewhere away from the apartment. So they went back to the States, and I worked there for Israeli government offices in Manhattan. And then I was just going back because I loved Israel and I was sad to leave it.
So you were going back to live in Israel?
I was going for a while, and that's when I met
So that's how that happened. And then I continued on Israeli ships, being that Zion went on passenger trades, but later on a new ship was built called Jerusalem, a passenger ship, and that one they wanted to break into the West Indian cruises with. So I went on that ship and for a long time was with them. And then what happened?
Decided to go to school?
Yeah, then I decided to go to school.
For what?
Well, Varda was in New York. The ship would come into New York, and heck, I didn't want to go back and forever. So I decided to try to go to school. Applied for NYU, got NYU in there, although they weren't sure what to make of my credentials. But NYU was too expensive. City College, on the other hand, which at that time was considered to be the Harvard of the East, or the city, was very good. They accepted 2 non-citizens each year, on condition that you actually made a commitment that when you have the opportunity, you'll become a citizen. So I signed off on that one, and now I started at City College. I got my bachelor there.
And what did you major in? What did you major in?
International trade.
Oh, interesting.
Because it seemed to me that would sound like, what should I say?
Yeah.
But actually it was a Bachelor of Business Administration.
Okay.
With that one, though, I was very lucky because I did very, very well on the exams. And then I got the offers. The City College itself had a scholarship for Chicago University, which they awarded to me. But I didn't want to go to Chicago. I didn't like the big cities. And I had my heart set on either Minnesota or Wisconsin.
Why?
So because that was very similar to my background in Sweden. Okay, Minnesota particularly. I applied to Minnesota. And they said no, their rules are, I was too old, I was 32 years old. I was too old for that. Wisconsin. I ran into a contingent of Scandinavian students from Denmark, Sweden and Norway.
Okay.
And I asked them, and they said they were A.C. Nielsen, Arthur Christian Nielsen scholars. So I said, what is that? Well, it turned out that A.C. Nielsen was treasurer of Quaker Oats. And in due time, when he retired, he had amassed a lot of money. And when he died, his son, another A.C. Nielsen Jr., had made another fortune by having what was known at the time as S&H stamps. You can't be familiar with that. When people bought something, they would get stamps called S&H, and they were pasted into a little booklet. And when the booklet was full, you could exchange it for goods or for money. Do you remember S&H?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so he did that. And on top of that, he now started also with the A.C. Nielsen television ratings. So A.C. Nielsen Jr., when he got the legacy from his father, the senior, he took the money and established the A.C. Nielsen Foundation, which would fund Scandinavian students at University of Wisconsin, only Wisconsin. So I applied. And one day I got the call. No, actually I got a declining saying, no, I have passed the age limit, they cannot do that. Just like in Minnesota. And so that's okay. I had my scholarship. Varda was working at the Judaic department there, and everything was fine. One day I got a call from A.C. Nielsen's secretary. He lived in Winnetka, in Chicago, Evanston, I think it is. Fancy area. And she said that Mr. Nielsen is intrigued by your background and he would like to see if there's any terms we can come to, and so on. So they invited us to go to Vinetka, which we did. It was, I'd never seen such a house. You know. Today, of course, you see it very often, but it was incredible. And he was the most nice man you can imagine. And I didn't know what impression we gave or anything. We came back, and shortly thereafter, I got a letter. Actually, it was the secretary calling me and saying that the letter will be forthcoming, laying out the terms. And it was extremely generous. It was a letter of credit against which I could draw what I needed.
Wow.
To be repaid by no more than 10% of my net income in coming years.
Wow.
Okay, which was very good. And that enabled me to go through school. And he was extremely generous in this way. He even let me draw upon it to go back to Sweden when our first daughter was born, to show her off and so on. And absolutely unbelievably good. And from Madison, when I graduated, we went to Washington. I got a position with the International Monetary Fund, which at that time, and even today, I guess, most economists would give their right arm to have, and so on. And so we went there, and well, what can I say about it?
Two more daughters were born.
Yeah, two of them were born in Washington. Jael was born in Madison, and the others there. And so I stayed with them for 3 years. And I wasn't happy. I didn't like Washington. Again, I can't even explain it, but big cities were not for me. And the other part of it, I wasn't used to it at all. The hierarchical order in Washington, where the senators, that was big. Congressmen, not so big. International, for instance, people at the World Bank, people at the IMF, the big shots. Wow, that was seen also. But would an economist at the IMF have any standing in there? I'm not sure. But anyway, it wasn't the best place to bring up children, I don't think. I was at IMF. I taught a couple of classes at University of Maryland, you know, in the extension. It wasn't really anything that was important, but again gave me a feeling for independence.
Sure.
And so then I got hooked on wanting to go to Alaska.
And you taught in Alaska? Or what did you do in Alaska?
I applied to the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, got the job, and we moved up there.
Wow, what was it like to...
I loved it.
Cold.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved it up there. The problem was, again, because this was 1968, right? Yeah, 68, I think, 67. Two things had happened up there. They had found oil, and they had a major earthquake. And there was an influx of people building up at the oil fields. And I found myself that the salary they offered, we just couldn't afford anything. Gasoline at the time, gas, was already $2 a gallon.
Wow.
You know, down in the lower 48, it was 25 cents.
Really?
So it was very difficult. Milk, fresh milk, ran about $4 a gallon. Couldn't possibly afford it. So what we did was we bought some milk, and then we had dry powder milk, and we sort of mixed it in there, so it was maybe 75% dry powder milk and 25% milk. And also there was health facilities. Health facilities were difficult. The hospital in Fairbanks was from 1905, had catered to gold diggers and so on, and it was really outdated, and everyone told you that you have to set aside a reserve so that you can make it at least to Anchorage and hopefully to Seattle in an emergency. And that was it. The pediatrician we had was with the Indian Health Services, and he flew his own plane and said, you can always reach me, but I can't always reach you. Meaning, that he will always be on call, but you couldn't count on his to come. Just before the Yom Kippur War, we left and came back to Denver. And then we came here, and then, wait a second, I'm missing out because the timeline is not quite clear to me, because we were in Nova Scotia.
That was in 78, Bernhardt.
Was it that late? Okay.
Yes. So 68 we went to Singapore, came to Denver in 69, and 71 to
You're
73
right. We were back in Israel. Yeah, right, you
and
are.
Then
we came up here.
78 we went to Nova Scotia.
Yeah,
from
then I went to Nova Scotia for a sabbatical. That passed there. So I taught up there for a year. Was there anything else? No, and then we came back here.
What were the main differences in education systems between all the different places that you taught?
Different of the educational system.
Yeah.
I wish I could tell you. I really don't know, The real difference does not lie in what you're teaching, because it's a discipline. The difference lies in the requirements they have. What, for instance, did Dalhousie, where I taught, what requirements did they have for graduation? And I don't even remember that right now. Same at National University in Singapore. What were the requirements there? What I taught was basically just the content of it. And in Singapore, I was teaching what we call then shipping economics, the economics of shipping.
Right.
That's one. And that turned out to be good.
Actually, the students there just took notes all the time.
Yeah.
Just every word that the
Yeah.
professor said, they took notes.
Yeah, that's also true, and that could be considered a difference,
Yeah.
because to them, what I said, what any professor said, was the gospel truth. And you didn't question
Singapore?
it in Singapore. You didn't question it, and you rehashed it on an exam.
That's interesting.
But it wasn't much different in other places, because that's the psychology of it. If you're a student, you try to say things that the professor agrees with.
Yeah.
And that's about it. And so that's it. But that's about it. Then when I was here, each year, for God knows how long, I did go over to Sweden in summertime to teach at some place called World Maritime University, which was a UN university. And I taught there for about 1 month each year. There are many things that are memorable, both good and bad. I don't know why this one comes to me bad, really bad. When we were in Danzig, called Sopot or Gdynia at the time, and then Danzig.
Part of Poland.
Yeah, part of Poland. We were loading coal. And the reason it's such hard memories for me is that I was very young. I was no more than 16. This was 46. When I don't know if it's even worth mentioning it, but when you come into the port, you have to drop the anchor to swing on the anchor to be able to go in, because it's a 90-degree turn. You can't do that. So you drop the anchor and then you swing on the anchor and go in. Bringing up the anchor, that was the first time I had seen that. And I was young and I was supposed to clean the anchor with a hose, hanging over there. And up it comes, and there's a body on it. So, and the reason for that was that the Germans, before they left, had sunk ships there, and obviously there were bodies in the ships. So that was one thing. In 1945, They had something
there?
in Sweden. I was there, yeah.
So tell us.
That's another story, which is not pleasant.
No,
but
it's...
Anyway, it was called the white buses. You might even want to Google it and see, because I'm sure it is there. That was a rescue mission that Himmler, do you know who Himmler was?
Mm-mm.
No, it was the second man in Germany, Goering and Himmler and all. And anyway, he knew the war was lost, and trying to save his skin, so to speak, agreed for the Swedes to come in, Red Cross, with white buses with red crosses on it, to rescue some kids and other people from the concentration camps. And they brought them into Sweden. Now, like everyone at that time, young people were part of the so-called Home Guard and Young Red Cross. And the Red Cross, bringing these people in, thought this will be a wonderful thing for the young people to greet the kids that are coming in from the concentration camps. And so we were waiting at the train station to welcome them, not being prepared, nor were the Red Cross for what was coming. And of course we were withdrawn almost immediately. It was a terrible experience.
And you were there? You were supposed to be greeting them? You were supposed to be greeting the...
Yes, greeting them showed youth to youth.
Right.
No.
Wow.
No.
And actually your brother married
Yeah.
one of the...
Okay.
Yeah, actually this is an interesting sideline. Lenke, she was Hungarian, and my brother, who participated in all this and became very active in welcoming these people, married her. She became an artist, a well-known artist in Sweden, and she became a protege of Nelly Sachs, who got the Nobel Prize in literature. I don't remember which year it was. For poetry, yeah. I don't remember which year. But so that there were some really, really prominent people in that part.
Wow.
So what did they do? Can I ask you? What did they do with the children then when they came
Oh
up?
no, they had to be rehabilitated, give them some food or whatever it is. They were emaciated, they were starved, the hollow eyes. You have seen pictures of it. And because when they filled up the buses, they were supposed to fill the original, if I remember correctly, idea was that the buses would bring Danish and Norwegian Jews out. But I don't know why they also took the Hungarians just to fill it up. But this was not people that had been well fed and taken care of. So all of them were later on immediately moved to rehabilitation camps in Sweden to feed them and to bring them back to health.
And then did you later have any interaction with any of the kids?
No.
No.
No, nothing at all.
What happened then?
No. In one sense, yes, because as they rehabilitated, some of them stayed in Sweden, and I get to know them. But by that time, of course, they were well adjusted physically, emotionally. I don't know, and others went to Israel, and others, I guess, might have gone to wherever in Europe where they could possibly go back. I don't know how many might have gone to the States.
I think the story also, there was a bathing place in Stockholm, what do you call it?
Eriksdal?
Yeah, where you scrubbed the king's back from...
Oh no, that was when I was in the... That's a good story actually. When I went to the Merchant Marine Academy in Sweden, every Saturday I would go to a sauna in a place called the Citizens Palace. It was just everyone would go there, But on Saturdays I would go because that was the end of the week. And so what you do is you go in there and there's the sauna. You know what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you always hope for somebody to scratch your back. I was alone in the sauna, so there was no one there. And then suddenly a couple of people come in. I don't remember, maybe two of them just regular guys, you know, sitting down there and see. But the third one had tattoos going down here on places that you couldn't see. So I thought, oh wow, that's a seaman. He can brush my back. So I asked him, will you brush my back and I'll brush yours? Yes, he said, you know, in Swedish, but with a Danish accent. Okay, so he scrubbed my back, I scrubbed his back, and everything was fine. And they go in, they cool off in the pool, and that's it. When I left, and usually after that I would have a cup of coffee and a piece of cake, and so take a little while. When I left and came out, there's a huge crowd standing outside the steps. And there's a car, and they are waiting for somebody to come out, so I went wait as well. The car had A1 on it, indicating that it was a royal car. And then they came out, these three guys that had been in the sauna, and just went into the car. And then it dawned upon me, the fellow with the tattoos was the king of Denmark, King Frederick, Denmark, and he was known for these things.
That's funny.
That was really something.
That's funny.
That was a nice memory. Thank you.
So that
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, because as you know, there's nothing better, more fun than talk about yourself.